Everybody thinks the US dollar is still as good as gold, and it hasn't been since 1971. Each unit of currency is backed up by an equivalent amount of gold in the treasury. In the United States, $20 bill, $20 gold piece in the vaults. Go into any bank, slap down your currency, which was a receipt for money, a claim check on money, ask for your money, gold and silver, and they would give it. And it gives governments the ability to start this scam in the first place, where they print these receipts for gold, and then they can print more of them than gold that exists. And that happened when we got to World War I, and all the combatants stopped redemption rights. You could no longer go in the bank and trade your pounds, lira, marks, francs, no longer redeemable in gold, and they lit up the printing presses and started printing like crazy. Then between the wars, they went on something called the gold exchange standard, where currencies would be backed partially by gold. So in the United States, under the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, the Federal Reserve was allowed to put $50 worth of claim checks on gold, currency in circulation, backed up by only $20 worth of gold. So it was a 40% reserve ratio. For every $20 gold piece in the vault, they could put $50. Now, during both wars, Europe paid the US with gold. During World War I, the US didn't get into the war until the very end of it. We didn't really have troops on the ground here in any quantity. So you take your factories that make toasters and they start making machine guns. Your factories that made cars are now building tanks. And so you turn your economy toward war, and all of your consumer goods and your grains had to be imported from the United States, and you paid us with gold. Then in World War II, Hitler starts saber rattling in 1936. So again, there's like 6 years where you're paying us with your gold and we're selling you stuff. This is where Americans have this myth that war is good for the economy. War is good for the economy if you're not in it and you're selling them the tools of the trade.
Yes, America's national income gets bigger and bigger. In 1943, it was $142 billion. That was double the 1939 figure, triple the figure for 1933.
But by the end of World War II, the US had 2/3 of all the world's monetary gold, the central bank gold, and the rest of the world had to share the other third, and Europe had none. So the world monetary system was no longer going to work. It would collapse. But we had made all these loans of dollars to Europe, so Europe was flooded with dollars. And so representatives from around the world met at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire in 1944. They came up with a new world monetary system called the Bretton Woods system, where every currency on the planet, with the exception of just a few, they would be backed by the US dollar, and the US dollar would then be backed by gold at $35 per ounce. This gave confidence to all currencies. So this gave the world stability, and it pegged all the world's currencies to each other through the dollar. Then the dollar standard starts because we kept on printing dollars. Under the Bretton Woods system, there was no reserve ratio established where the US actually had to have a certain amount of gold for how many dollars we created. So we had done a bunch of deficit spending for Korea, for Vietnam, for Johnson's Great Society, and expanded the currency supply, the amount of paper dollars in circulation, and exported them all over the world. And then in the 60s, Charles de Gaulle, president of France, realizes that we don't have the gold to back up the dollars.
Le fait que beaucoup d'États acceptent par principe des dollars au même titre que de l'or entraîne les Américains à s'endetter, et à s'endetter gratuitement vis-à-vis de l'étranger, car ce qu'ils lui doivent, ils le lui payent avec des dollars qu'il ne tient qu'à eux d'émettre. Nous estimons nécessaire que les échanges internationaux. Quelle base? En vérité, on ne voit pas qu'il puisse y avoir réellement.
And he starts asking, France asks for their gold and trades in the dollars. And at that point, other countries saw this and start jumping on board. And the US lost 50% of its gold from 1959 to 1971, but we still had in 71 about 12 times more dollars that we had created than there was gold. And this run on the bank, basically, the U.S. now being the bank, this is a giant worldwide bank run, because the U.S. for the second time had committed a fraud and created more receipts for gold than there was gold. It's that simple. Then finally the markets sort of sensed this, and Nixon was forced to take us off the gold standard, because if he had paid out gold until it got to zero, once we couldn't pay on some of those dollars, the entire worldwide monetary system would have collapsed.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States. In full cooperation with the International Monetary Fund and those who trade with us, we will press for the necessary reforms to set up an urgently needed new international monetary system.
And on August 15th, 1971, all the world's currencies became fiat currency. I don't know why the rest of the world didn't rush out and hang him, but they didn't. They just all went along with this.
To our friends abroad, I give this assurance. The United States has always been and will continue to be a forward-looking and trustworthy trading partner.
There have been thousands upon thousands upon thousands of fiat currencies throughout history, and there isn't one that survived. It is a 100% failure rate. And we started this experiment where all the world's currencies would be fiat currencies simultaneously in 1971. 5,000 years, only gold and silver have maintained their purchasing power. There have been thousands upon thousands of fiat currencies, currencies that are unbacked by gold or silver, and they have all gone to zero. It's a 100% failure rate.
Well, fiat currency, of course, is a currency that exists at the dictate or by fiat from a government. You see, they have their printing presses, and the paper money rolls off the printing presses. And then they give it the fiat designation, which makes the currency official. It's just worthless paper. But when Ben Bernanke gives it the special sign, and they have the cult meeting at the Federal Open Market Committee meetings, it suddenly becomes currency.
If you look at what's really going on, it's a con game. And so there's confidence. Well, the Federal Reserve is very forthright about what they're doing. If you read their websites, they'll tell you it's a confidence game. They tell you that there's no intrinsic value in their money. They'll tell you that they print it backed by absolutely nothing. They actually display all these facts. But if you tell somebody in the public that this stuff is created out of thin air, there's no backing whatsoever, it's absolutely worthless, it's about as valuable as monopoly money, they'll look at you like you're nuts.
Base currency in the United States. This is the number of paper dollars that exist, basically. It took 200 years to go from no dollars in existence to 825 billion. And then we had the bailouts, and then we had QE1, quantitative easing 1, then QE2, and then we had QE3, and then QE4, and then soon we're going to have QE57 and QE382. And it isn't just here. This is what the Canadian currency supply looks like. This is Australia, South Africa, Russia. Now, this starts out in just the year 2001, and this is like 18 times more currency in existence in a little over a decade. Here's Singapore, same story. Look at that, since the crisis, just bam. India, China, every government on the planet is doing this insane deficit spending and expanding their currency supplies, doing bailouts, and history shows that there is no example of this turning out well.
It is sometimes amazing that we haven't experienced more inflation than we have. If they keep expanding the money supply so vastly, why aren't our prices growing faster than they really are? And the answer is that a good chunk of the money that the Fed created has been shipped overseas. I remember early in my research, I heard this expression that the Americans have exported their inflation. I thought, What is that? How can you export your inflation? Put it in a box and send it out? What do you do? Well, now I understand. You export your inflation by simply sending all these dollars that you created to these other countries, and then they send you their refrigerators and their cars and whatever, their TV sets. So you get hardware, and they get little pieces of paper. It's a great deal for the American people for a while. For a while. Sooner or later, all of those pigeons come home to roost. When the time comes, as it looks like it's now coming, when the rest of the world is saying, we don't want to play this game anymore, Uncle Sam's dollars are just becoming worthless, there are too many of them, we've got to find something else other than American dollars, then those dollars start to come back to America. People say, we don't want them anymore, what do we do with them? Once this revs up, and we've got this little trickle of money coming back that we previously exported, once it becomes a flood and it starts to rush back, now we are getting our former exported inflation brought back to us, and then we'll see the quantity of money inside the United States grow much more rapidly even than the Federal Reserve can create it, because we're getting a previous money back. And that's when we will really see the tanking of the US dollar in terms of what it will buy.
It's punishing the very people who are most productive in society. In other words, the people that produce more than they consume and save the difference. The problem is that those productive people, the savers, save in their national currency. And unfortunately, the national currency is just a fiat piece of paper at this point. So when it's destroyed through runaway inflation, that $100,000 that you were hoping to retire on doesn't exist. And the things that you were going to buy with it and provide for others don't exist either. Now what are you going to do?
Governments and the banks have basically screwed us more and more and more. And these new currency systems are always created by the same idiots that created the last one that fell apart. It's the big banks, it's the central banks, and it's governments that are creating these new systems each time. And each time, the system they come up with is a system that cheats the population more and enriches the government and the banks more. It's a system that transfers wealth at greater and greater speeds. That has huge effects for everyone who lives on this planet. Most people can feel deep down that something isn't quite right with the world economy, but few know what it is. Gone are the days where a family can survive on just one paycheck. Every day it seems things are more and more out of control, yet only 1 in a million understand why. You are about to discover the system that is ultimately responsible for most of the inequality in our world today. The powers that be do not want you to know about this, as this system is what has kept them at the top of the financial food chain for the last 100 years. Learning this will change your life because it'll change the choices that you make. Right now we're on the precipice of the whole system collapsing, and just like the game, our monetary system will reset. What we have here, 30 to 40 years, different monetary system, 30 years, 28 years, 39 years plus. What's next? The world is going to have a new monetary system in this decade. The transfer that will take place during this decade is the greatest wealth transfer in history. Wealth is never destroyed, it is merely transferred, and that means that on the opposite side of every crisis there is an opportunity. The great news is that all you have to do to turn this crisis into your great opportunity is to educate yourself.